Attention, attention, it's episode 3 of Growing Up Punk. Well, welcome back to Music to... No.
Oh, come on.
I know. Hello.
Edit.
Woo! I've been working on too many of the Lost Tapes episodes where I have to say music to my peers.
Well, that's a good excuse.
Welcome back, yes, to Growing Up Punk, the podcast where we talk about punk rock and all of its friends. We got Aaron, that would be you over there. Say hi, Aaron.
What's up, Major Pains?
I expected the dad in you to just respond with hi, Aaron. You let me down.
Sorry. I was trying to think of a sweet movie reference, and Major Pain came to mind.
Major Pain is what you came up with.
I don't even know if I even saw that movie, but
that's the one where he's like,
brain.
He's like, the kid's crying about something. He's like, I'll give you something to cry about, and he like breaks his finger or something like that. Yeah, classic.
That's what we're all about here.
I think that was a Wayans Brothers film. Anyway, I am the other voice. My name is David. We got to get that out of there. Real quick, we'll do the whole social media stuff. You can find us wherever you find things on social media for the most part. We are on Facebook. Just look up Growing Up Punk. We are also on Twitter at Growing Punk Pod. We are on Instagram at Growing Up Punk. I myself am on Instagram and Twitter at David Growing Up. And you, sir, Aaron, are on Instagram. Where
Aaron Grew Up Punk. And I'm also on LinkedIn.
Oh, LinkedIn. All right. Sweet.
So if you have a business, let me know.
Yeah, I'm going to send you some requests on LinkedIn. I was on LinkedIn at one point, and I don't think I ever did a single thing on it.
Yeah, me neither.
But I think I do have a profile on LinkedIn somewhere.
Nice.
But we've all had our faults. We've all had missteps and such. Do you have snow there yet?
Oh, it's been snowing all day.
Yeah, okay. We got snowy. See, like I'm not just dressed as Ian Mackay for fun. I'm wearing my beanie because we do have snow.
Yeah.
You know, it was a day where I was like, I'm going to put my beanie on because it's cold outside.
You guys just getting snow now?
Well, I mean, we had snow overnight. Like, so we woke up to snow, but we had snow a little while ago, but it wasn't like it was gone. It had been gone for weeks. Like, we haven't had snow since probably a week or two before Halloween, and it was gone, and then it came back. I think it's probably safe to say, for the most part, it's here to stay now. I don't know. That's the way life works where I'm from.
Yeah, same here.
Sweet. So, before I was going to get into the band we're going to talk about, but I did want to share a little, like a tiny little review, because on the weekend I got to see Seaway with Youth Fountain and First Ghost. And what a show. I mean, Seaway is always fun. You know what to expect every time you see them. They're just like a party band. Youth Fountain was so good, which awesome. I wasn't surprised by that. But yeah, I learned something, though. I knew they were Canadian. Didn't realize they're from Vancouver. So, hi, Youth Fountain in Vancouver, where I don't live. None of us live. But you're on this side of the country, so we cool.
Yeah.
And then First Ghost, they're actually from Toronto, and they were the band that I came home from the show with merch from, so that's cool. They're kind of like I think I described them to you as like old, like early Copeland meets Jimmy Eat World with a little bit of like American football sort of stuff in there. But their one guitar player played a Gibson SG. Like, when I say that, do you know what, can you picture what guitar I'm talking about? Yeah. Which I thought was hilarious because, I mean, typically when I see an SG, I think of, like fast melodic punk or like AC/DC.
Yeah, I was just
but no, he's like he's playing like sensitive riffs. So I was like, I've never heard an SG sound so sensitive.
Nice.
But that was cool. Yeah. And on top of that, not only did I buy a T-shirt of theirs, but this is something that hasn't happened in a long time for me. They gave me a free CD. When was the last time a band just was like, here, want a CD?
Actually, Sharp Shock, who opened up for the Interrupters last week, as people were leaving, the singer guitar player was standing at the door handing out CDs.
Oh, nice.
So there you go.
It doesn't happen very often. I figured First Ghost was just trying to get rid of their CDs because it was like one of their early EPs, and they're probably like, we don't really want to carry these around with us anymore. So if you buy something, you get a free CD. I listened through it once on my CD player in my car, and I was like, that was cool. I probably won't listen to it again on like actual physical CD.
Right. Yeah, but it's enough to make you remember them. So maybe
Sure,
that's all it takes, and it's worth it.
Yeah, it was a good show too. So that's always fun. Yeah, so that was just a little quick update. Who I got to see this past weekend. It was fun. You missed it. They were in Saskatoon, right?
Regina.
Saskatoon. You live in Regina.
Yeah, they were in Saskatoon. It was very convenient for me.
Only a couple hours away.
Yeah, they were in Regina, but I was busy that night, and so wasn't able to get
excuses. I get it. I get it. We've all got our excuses to not live our best life. I understand.
Well, that's possibly true.
Yeah. No, but okay, we're here to talk about. I want to see if I can segue. So Seaway reminds me their like latest stuff. Reminds me of, which is now a couple years old. Reminds me of a mix between Weezer and Third Eye Blind, who were bands that also came up, especially Weezer, around the same time as this band that we're going to talk about. We're talking about Green Day.
Do you have the time to listen to me whine about nothing and everything all at once? I am one of those.
So, yeah, which we said in our last episode, our face-to-face episode, that realistically, they were, if you grew up a 90s kid and you found yourself getting into punk rock, there was a really good chance that was thanks to Green Day initially. Whether you say like, they were the first punk band, because I mean, some people will argue whether or not they're a punk band. I say yes, 100% they were a punk band. Yeah, they just happened to write better songs than a good majority of punk bands that got them on the radio at the right time. Yeah, so when we started with like MXPX and stuff, we're kind of jumping around a little bit, but we mentioned them in the last episode, then thought we should do an episode about Green Day. So here we are, doing an episode about Green Day. How can you remember, because it was a long time ago, how you got introduced to Green Day?
Yeah, well, even just a thought before that, as you just mentioned, I was just watching some live videos of theirs, because they just did a 25 anniversary show for Dookie, and it was just like this small venue. It might have even been like a surprise show.
How did you say that? How did you say
Dookie?
that? Dookie?
Dookie.
Cookie? Dookie like cookie? Yeah. I want to say, I've never heard anyone say Dookie.
Dookie.
Milk and Dookies.
Now I feel weird saying it. So
I want to say it's
album,
Dookie.
Dookie, yeah.
Yeah, there it is.
Pardon me if maybe it's one of those titles I just don't say enough, or I haven't said recently.
That's fair.
So
it's spelled like cookie, so.
All right, I'm just going to refer to it as cookies now.
Cookies and milk.
So I was watching it and just thinking, like, it's such a weird coincidence, or however it works when certain bands blow up on things or certain eras or whatever. So it's like these songs they're really cool, but they're not anything kind of special. But for whatever reason, that album just exploded. But back to the first time I heard it. I was in grade 5 or 6, and I found a cassette on the schoolyard playground, and it had Dookie.
Now he's going to be super self-conscious about it.
Dookie, and I think it had the Offspring Smash on it as well.
Oh, sick.
And
okay.
And I mean, I had no idea what it was. I don't even know how long it took me to realize what it was. None of my friends or anyone would have known. So. But I just remember listening to it and just kind of being in awe of, first of all, just hearing something I never heard before, kind of feeling like I had to, hide it from my parents. And so that kind of whole thing of not really knowing what to do with it, but knew I really liked it.
Right.
And like I said, I had no context to it. I don't even know how long it would have taken me to know who it was, but I just listened to it a lot, and then I can't even remember maybe when it was when I would have figured it out, or
right.
Yeah. So it's so weird, in that time with not having the internet or whatever. I wouldn't have even known how to look that up. I think it was just when the next album came out, my brother had borrowed it from a friend, and then maybe I pieced it together by then or whatever. But yeah, it was just by chance. It was just Mother Nature's way of blessing one of its children, so to speak.
One of its sweet children, as you would, because
Yeah.
that's to stay on the
On
whole
the
Green Day
music.
topic. Yeah, I'm sorry if I'm making really weird faces at you on camera right now. I'm trying to edit something on my phone that I want to be visible on my computer.
Okay.
So I'm just like kind of staring oddly. I can't find our conversation. What the heck? Where'd you go? Where'd you go, Aaron?
I'm here.
Oh, there you are. I found you again. I was trying
Yeah,
to transfer something from my notes on my phone to like our Google Doc. So I'm just like, keep talking, Aaron.
Yeah, it's just funny how random things like that, had that not happened, who knows would have, I'm sure I would have come across it eventually, but I just love stories like that. It's just this influential band at the time just blowing up, and, just this random kid finds this cassette tape and takes it home and gives it a rip, and here we are.
Yeah, I can't remember. Like, I don't have a specific story like that where it's like, oh, I can pinpoint exactly. Because I'm sure for me it was just on the radio is where I would have heard, whether it was When I Come Around or Basket Case. One of those two songs, maybe Longview. I want to say it was either Basket Case or When I Come Around, though. But probably just hearing it on the radio, and then, friends. Like, I can remember walking down the hallway. I would have been in grade 6, I want to say. And I was walking down the hallway with a group of friends, and for whatever reason, we were walking from one class to the next, and we were just singing Basket Case. Like, no music on. We were just walking down the hall, like probably 6 or 7 of us singing Basket Case. And like initially, I mean, they weren't like a band where I was like, oh man, I love Green Day. Cause like they came and played sometime around then, maybe the next year, like 97. And like, that was before I would have been into going to shows, right? Like,
Right.
I didn't go to, but I had a friend who went, and I just remember him talking about how like they, cause I want to say they played at the Saddle Dome in Calgary. So, I mean, like an arena, right?
Yeah.
Like, so this was definitely after they blew up. And he was talking about like how him and his buddy like totally trashed their seats at the Saddle Dome, like jumping up and down on them and like broke the seats. And I was like, oh man. Yeah, they're a band that it's funny because like I feel for the longest time I didn't necessarily appreciate them. Like, I really enjoyed them in those days, hearing them on the radio, like whether like starting with Dookie and then moving forward through Insomniac and Nimrod and Warning and stuff, and really knowing like their radio singles. Once Nimrod came out, I kind of started getting into them a little more for a period. But then like a lot of bands, but earlier I think than a lot of bands that I really loved, I kind of just like shifted away from them a little bit. Like, I didn't get into the American Idiot and 21st Century Breakdown era of Green Day until well after those records were released.
Yeah, me too.
And now I do love them. Like, obviously, like it shows just how good of songwriters, or I guess specifically how good of a songwriter Billy Joe is, which when you watch like any documentary, so I watched it was like, I want to say it was like a VH1 behind the music thing that someone had ripped and put on YouTube, like horrible quality, because it was from the time, around the time Warning came out. I don't even know if Warning was out yet, or if it was kind of done like leading into it or whatever. It's a bit of a promotion, but so it's just like poor quality. But they talk about in a lot of like the familiar faces from like the Gilman Street era, talking about just how obviously talented Billy Joe was in songwriting. And I think, that really shows even more so like with that, I guess, rock opera era of Green Day. I keep wanting to call them Blink-182 for no reason except I watched a concert earlier today. They were playing in Australia. It was in front of like maybe 200 people. And it was like, I think it was Australia, and there was like live on Goat Island. And so I guess it was like this contest that people had won to go watch them, right? So this was like they were touring Warning. And so from what I could understand, they played a show, like a proper show the night before. And then there were contest winners that won tickets to go see them on this small island at an outdoor show. It was like 200 of them. Yeah. But in it, at one point in time, because the backdrop behind them is like, I don't know if it's Sydney or whatever, so like the Sydney harbor or whatever city they're in, like the harbor. And so it's water behind them. There's boats passing, and at one point there's this old like sailboat that passes. That's like, and they start talking about how, oh, the pirates on this boat or whatever, and they're talking about all the things they should do to these people passing on this boat. And so they're yelling at them through the microphones and stuff like that. And someone yells, "Take off your pants!" And then Billy Joe says, "We're not Blink 182." And I was like, it was just such like a random little like name drop, because I want to guess that was probably, if it was Warning that they were touring. I want to say that's like, what, that was 99 that Warning came out. So it was probably
2000,
around the time of like Blink blowing up.
Yeah.
What is Discog says Warning came out in 2000.
Yeah.
So yeah, like Blink had blown up What's My Age Again and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
what the state was. So yeah, I thought it was just kind of a funny little thing. But yeah, so I feel like I'm going to say Blink 182 all show. And
Well, I'll say
there's
I'll
really
say
no
Dookie,
reason for it.
You
'Cause-
say Blink 182, and we'll just confuse everyone.
It's really
Wait,
just
what is
boils
this about?
down. It just boils down to personal pronunciations. You pronounce Dookie as Dookie, and I pronounce Green Day as Blink 182. It's, I mean, whatever. You know, it's tomato. What's the difference?
Yeah. That's funny,
But,
you guys. You were saying you were walking around singing Basket Case too, because now that I listen to that song, I mean, not just now, but in later years, just realize like what the lyrics are, and it's like, oh, that's kind of a weird song for, you know, grade 6 or 7 kids to be walking
Right.
around singing. And
Yep. It is funny though, because I want to say it was either that song or Wonderwall were like the first two songs that I can remember learning all of the lyrics to and like knowing. And I mean, they probably were they on the radio around the same time? When did I wonder
yeah,
when
I
Oasis?
don't know about Oasis.
Come on, man,
and that
get
would've
your information together. I'm curious. I'm gonna look this up because I can. I have this thing called the internet. Oasis. When did What's the Story Morning Glory come out? Actually, What's the Story Morning Glory might have been a couple years after. Oh no, it was next year, 95. So What's the Story Morning Glory came out in 95, and
so similar.
we
time.
decided Dookie came out in 94. I mean, I don't know when Basket Case came out as a single. They may have been singles around the same time, but I can
Yep,
definitely,
could
like
be.
that time in my life, remember listening to and learning all of the words to those two songs.
Yeah.
But we're not here to talk about Oasis. As awesome as they are, and as much as I went on like an Oasis, like just like rabbit hole recently, because of YouTube. YouTube's the worst. Like it recommended for whatever, and the best. For whatever reason, it recommended a Liam Gallagher acoustic show, like MTV Unplugged from like MTV Italy or something like that. And so I watched it, and then from there I was just like listening to Oasis for the next 2 weeks and nothing else. So anyway, Green Day. So did you ever get a chance? I shouldn't say did, like as if it's past tense. They're literally, as we're recording this, on tour in Europe right now. But have you ever had the chance to see them live?
Well, it's funny you say it like that, because I feel like even if I, did have the chance to see them live now, it just would be so much different than, you know, what it would have been like even 10 years ago. And so unfortunately I have not seen them live. I think they might have, they would have been like maybe in Winnipeg 5 years ago or something. And I just didn't make it out there, but yeah, I've watched a ton of their concerts on YouTube, and they look like an amazing live band. However, I feel like now, just with how their albums have progressed, I don't really enjoy their later stuff as much. Whether it's, you know, even American Idiot, which I know has been out for a while now, but I just
Like
it would have been so
15
awesome to
years.
see them, like, you know, in 2000 when, you know, when Warning was their newest, and because I feel like kind of
Right.
after that they really made a big shift in their sound and just maturity as songwriters and stuff. And so yeah, I haven't seen them. If I had the chance, I would still definitely try to make it out.
Oh, 100% I would go. Now, having said that, I've said the same thing about like Foo Fighters, and they've been to town a couple times since I've lived in Edmonton, and I've skipped every time because I still have a hard time paying like $60 to sit in the nosebleeds, right? Where I'm like, like I don't really understanding fully that it's not like I'm going to be able to see Green Day or Foo Fighters in, you know, like a 1,000-person club, right?
Yeah.
Like that's not going to happen, but you know, so as far as that is concerned, but like for me, yeah, I obviously like they've come around a few times and I've just never had the chance. And I think part of that, or I shouldn't say had the chance, just never had the drive. And I think part of that was because for the longest time they were like a band that I liked, but they were never a band that I loved.
Yeah.
For me anyway. Like I always like, I mean, you know, Green Day as soon as it comes on the radio, and you know, the only like CD I ever owned of theirs up until more recently was Kerplunk, and it's because I bought it off a guy who had bought it and then didn't like it because obviously it's not the same recording quality as their later albums, right? Like being the last of their like independent releases. But you know, so it was the only one I ever owned. But now more recently, I like, you know, we've talked about this off and on, not a ton on the show, but just like with going to thrift stores, I had like a mission in mind where I was trying to acquire the entire Green Day library purely by buying them at thrift stores.
Yeah.
And I did pretty good. Like I've got,
Yeah, that's
what
where
did I
I've
end
got
up
my
finding?
latest ones from theirs too.
Yeah. Well, and like I haven't gone thrifting for CDs in a while, but like I got Dookie, I got Insomniac, got Nimrod. I've passed on Warning a couple times because I've never found one in good enough shape.
Oh yeah, I'd buy that one too if I could.
Yeah, and then American Idiot I got, and 21st Century Breakdown, and American Idiot, when I bought it, it was still sealed.
Oh, nice.
Which I was like, wow. But and then I did have a chance to buy Revolution Radio, which is impressive that it was already at a thrift store. But
Yeah,
I didn't buy it
that's
because it was
awesome.
kind of after I stopped buying CDs at thrift stores. Now that I can just use my phone in my car.
Yeah.
I've advanced with technology a little bit.
Still about the CDs. Yeah, I would say
Yeah.
that anytime Green Day had an album coming out, like I don't remember ever being like super excited or, you know, going to the store day of or any of that kind of
Right.
thing. I think they were always one of those bands that I liked if they came on, but it wasn't like my favorite style of punk. Like I was always drawn to, you know, the faster skate punk stuff.
Yeah.
However, maybe in the last number of years, I've appreciated it more. Like when I listened through, you know, all their albums last week, like I loved it. It like I knew all the songs, and
Yeah.
so I've listened to them enough to know them. But I guess just for whatever reason, you know, maybe there's one of those bands that just at the right time, it's just perfect, but at the wrong
Right.
time, it's like, yeah, I prefer something else.
Well, they're interesting in the sense that, I mean, they're very straightforward, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
Mike Dirnt as a bass player is constantly walking, which is one thing, right? Like he has his own style.
Yeah,
Like when you
definitely.
hear a Mike Dirnt bass line, you're like, oh yeah, Green Day. But as far as like Billy Joe and Trey Cool are concerned, I've always found like while Billy Joe just kind of does that straight ahead driving sort of like punk rock downstroke for
Yeah.
the most part, right? Much like in the way we talked about MXPX and even Face to Face, and the fact that he doesn't write a lot of like riffs, he just bases a lot of his music on, you know, chords and melodies and whatever, not necessarily writing these monstrous riffs that get stuck in your head.
Right.
But Trey Cool as a drummer is what always, for the most part, and some people will probably curse my name for saying this, but for the most part is a lot of times like kind of left me wanting a little bit with Green Day. Like I always felt like, he's just such a boring drummer, which, and now you as a drummer, I'm curious to get your thoughts on him. Like, I mean, he's a solid drummer,
Yeah.
but I just find like he's constantly doing like that. And maybe this is like a big skill thing, whether it's like doing his, you know, eighth notes on the hi-hat or whatever, or 16ths, maybe even at some time, as opposed to like just opening up and doing a straight, like punk beat, right?
Yeah,
on
yeah.
faster
Yeah, I've
songs.
noticed that
He kind
too.
of keeps it dialed back a lot. And
Yeah.
that always, like when I was just looking for like that energy and like, yeah, it just never, that always failed to materialize for me when I was younger.
Yeah, yeah, and I think, yeah, now you say that, and I've noticed that too. I don't know if they're just trying to kind of stick in that more kind of classic sound as a lot of, maybe bands of that era. I'm trying to think of, even like say like AC/DC or something, they're definitely a more, guitar driven, more kind of anthemic. The drums aren't really ever like front and center. It's definitely not, a Travis Barker situation by any means.
Sure.
But maybe in that style of a band, that's kind of what they would like. Like there's bands like The Offspring. I remember seeing an interview or reading something about how they switched drummers or something, and the singer was just told him like, just play exactly how it is. I don't want you doing any fills or anything fancy. The songs aren't written for that, and so it's kind of an interesting approach to take on it.
Yeah, well, and I think like I'm not looking for, because especially like listening to Green Day at the time, Travis Barker wasn't yet a thing in my brain, right? Like, especially early on, but wouldn't be looking for that, but like more of the, I don't know if the term is like cut beat or whatever. Like, where it's more like boop bap boop bap boop bap boop bap boop bap boop bap. If I can drum with my mouth, that's why people tune into the show, is to hear me make drumming sounds with my mouth.
That should be the new
but do you know what I mean? Like, but you know what I mean, right? Like he's just always been more of a straightforward, maybe even like a 4 on the floor kind of beat versus opening it up. And at the same point, I don't know if maybe it's just like Billy Joe doesn't write songs that fit that. It'd be interesting. There's I want to say his name is Kai Smith. Have you ever listened to Kai Smith? He's a YouTube a drummer. He did like a Green Day song. I don't remember which song it was, but where he basically opened it up like that. And I was like, oh man, like it takes on an entirely different vibe, right? But again, that's not Green Day, right? Like Green Day very much just, they said things. And I think this is when a lot of people got into punk rock and then started bands or whatever, especially like that early stuff where they were coming out of, like the hardcore phase of punk, where they're like, oh, it's like Mike Dirnt. I heard a quote where he said, it sounded like guys playing instruments plugged into amps like mine, crappy ones. And so like, that's why, they originally got into punk in the first place and wanted to start Sweet Children. And so hearing some of that, like, I mean, obviously later in their years, they would go on and like write these like rock opera type things, which is a different thing in itself, but early on, I just wonder if it was just the fact that, because obviously Trey wasn't the drummer from the very beginning, but just that whole idea of it's raw, it's simple, because they've kind of kept that.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's intriguing. I don't know if I can think of another band that's put out that many, punk albums that didn't even have, one fast song. And I thought of that as I was listening to the discography. There's, I mean, obviously a lot of upbeat songs, but it just never goes to that double time. And maybe, I don't know if that was a conscious thing or just how he wrote. But in saying that, I still think that Trey Cool is a very iconic drummer. Which is cool that, it doesn't have to be, about crazy drumming. Sometimes it's just about the persona, the personality of the drummer, and just keeping it solid and being a part of the band. So that's what's unique about instruments, or not instruments, but musicians. It's like you can be really good, but not necessarily in a showy way. Yeah. And I think that's, he fits that really well.
You just really got to like your hi-hat when listening to Trey Cool.
He doesn't have crash cymbals. He just has more hi-hats up there.
He just has a closed hi-hat and an open hi-hat and then a
medium
ride. And the medium hi-hat. And the only time he uses the ride is for like little like quiet accents. Diddling, like, no. But like as far as like talking about the band, the one thing I love, in listening to Green Day over this past little bit was just like how, especially that early stuff, right? Like obviously they've all grown, they've all gotten older, their views on life change, and they, their focuses change a little bit. So like that early stuff, what I always loved thinking about this was that like Billy Joe is, his voice is obviously iconic, right?
Yeah.
So Green Day that early stuff was so just like teen angst filled.
Oh yeah.
Which it was much. Like the perfect music for, someone growing up to listen to kind of be like, yeah, my parents, man, like they just don't get me.
Yeah.
But then at the same point, what I loved is that in Billy Joe's voice, he literally sounds, the way he sings to me, sounds like he's mocking people, which is so good. Because you know how he just like, like I'm not going to do a Billy Joe impersonation. We all know what he sounds like, right? Like he has that voice where it's like slurring words kind of together and just like lazy, pronunciation's not the right word, but articulation sort of thing. But yeah, I was just like thinking about, especially I was listening to the song Brat because I was like trying to think of like, oh, are there any lyrics that jumped out to me? And I do have something to say about Green Day lyrics in general, but the lyrics in Brat where it says, Mom and Dad don't look so hot these days, but my future's looking good.
Yeah.
I was like, how, because I mean, that came off of Insomniac. So that was their second major label release, like after Dookie blew up. And a lot of it was like this angry retort to just like being cast out of like the Gilman scene, right? Like where they came out of. And so he's pissed off, right? And so like I just love that line though, because it's kind of like, Mom and Dad don't get me, but I get me, and that's all that matters. Or, you don't get me, but I get me, and that's all that matters. And then you double that down with his voice and just how like meh he seems to be. Snotty is a great word. It's just like absolutely perfect, right? And I think he obviously influenced a lot of vocalists that would come down the line with those records and just with who he is. But what I was gonna say, and then maybe you can add if you've got any thoughts on lyrics. Green Day they never really jumped out to me for their lyrics.
Yeah.
Sometimes I always felt like Billy Joe has a certain way to like get his lines, his syllables to fall in line so well with the count of the song, right? Like where he could just like rattle stuff off. And I emulated him when playing music, when I was in high school and whatever, in like a lot of his style, because he obviously has a style as well when you watch him perform live, right? Like just making faces and whatever, and his guitar's down to his knees. He had the punk rock stance down.
Yeah, so good.
But just like, getting his syllables to fall in line, like right on the beat so well. But the lyrics never really jumped out to me because sometimes I felt like maybe he was focusing on that, like just the flow of the song,
right,
versus actually the message. But what can you name any other band out there that has had a hit single about masturbation and then also a hit single about like the political climate?
Right. Yeah.
I don't think you can.
Yeah, like again, as I was listening through, and I wonder if they thought that too when they were, putting out these albums, if they just caught them by surprise that it, it went as mainstream as it did, especially back then. But I mean, none of their lyrics really stand out to me. I mean, it suits the music and it's fine. I mean, there's nothing like life-giving about the lyrics, but I don't necessarily go to a band like that for that anyways, so...
Sure.
But as they progressed, like I think maybe around Warning, you started to kind of take a more political stance and kind of notice some shift in the lyrics there.
Yeah, well, I know for sure, like going into Warning, like because they took time off, right? Like they actually had not broken up, but they went on hiatus between Nimrod and Warning,
right?
And because like Billy Joe had just had his second kid and was like going through this thing where he's like, he lost his dad at a young age. Like his dad died of cancer, I think it was.
Yeah.
And then so he was like, I don't want my kids to grow up without a dad. So he's like, we need to rethink this whole thing. And so they took time off. And then so there's definitely, it's funny because like then when you watch their live performances when they're touring for Warning, I don't think it necessarily took anything away from that. Like they were still like bratty punk rock kids, but they had definitely, I think, matured. And you can hear that in Warning itself, just like the diversity of the music, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I know a lot of people complained about it because it wasn't Dookie, it wasn't Nimrod, it wasn't Insomniac, right? It was different.
Yeah.
But at the same point, they literally end there. Was it the last song on Nimrod? like Good Riddance, or was it second last? But anyways, they legit
Yeah,
had
the
an
last one,
acoustic
yeah.
ballad. Yeah,
Yeah.
an acoustic ballad on their album prior to that. So when people talk about like that shift there, I'm always like, is it really that big? Like, I mean, they were messing around with acoustic guitars on the album before, and no one really pulled that out.
I
Obviously,
think it was just the shift that the whole album, it wasn't just a song here or there, but the whole album had a different sound and just a whole different energy to it. And I don't really remember. Well, maybe I do. Of when it came out, being like, oh, like this, I don't like this. But I think
Right.
as it progressed, like it's still not in my top Green Day albums by any means. But again, when I listened to it last week, like I really enjoyed it and found myself singing along, and so I've definitely listened to it enough to know it.
it is like before they made the major shift, to like American Idiot sort of stuff. It is probably the most like standout, I guess, the most like it has the most character out of, I think, any of their albums.
Yeah, that's true.
Leading up to that. But again, it is a big shift, right? And that doesn't always translate. Like, I know sometimes listening to that record, I kind of get like, okay, like I like it, and I remember liking it when it came out. Like I borrowed it. Like I borrowed that one and Nimrod were the only two I ever borrowed from friends. And I do remember, like, especially like the Church on Sunday or whatever, that song, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like, I did for sure enjoy that album. But talking about shifts, so obviously, like, it's no secret that when they released American Idiot, it was a very different Green Day.
Yeah, and I think like that's probably by far the era or album that I just missed out on the most. I'm not sure what year that came out, but I was probably just way past even really caring at that point. And then especially with only, the songs that they played on the radio were just songs I did not care for. And so I just kind of bypassed that album and didn't even really give it much of a chance.
It blows my mind, to be honest, because like I was similar in the sense, like, when it came out, I was like, all right, fine, like, this is weird, for a punk band to be doing this, but whatever, it's its own thing. But how weird is it that you can guarantee that record introduced them to like an entirely different era of fans?
Yeah, oh, for sure.
And it, like, I'm curious to know if they don't do that record, let's say Warning, or even, because I think Shenanigans was after Warning before American Idiot.
Shenanigans?
Yeah. Have you not listened to that?
No, what is that?
It's an album. You should have listened to it.
A studio
The first song
album?
the first song on that record is fantastic. If only because I don't know what the deal is with it, because it doesn't come up on their discography, but I wonder if it's B-sides or something like that.
That sounds familiar. Yeah, because I definitely don't. That album didn't come up on Spotify or anything.
Yeah, well, it's funny because it's not on their discography. But anyways, the first song on that record is, I think it's the first song. There's like this alarm clock sound that goes off, and this guy just like starts smashing the alarm clock and freaking out. Nice. And it's like you expect it to be like smash and it's done, but he's just like ah, ah, and he's just like smashing all sorts of stuff. The song starts and stops, and he's still going ah, ah, smashing stuff, and then it starts again. It's just like kind of this fun little intro, but and now you got me wondering what that record actually is, because it's I for sure listened to it on Apple Music, and I don't remember where I was going. Oh, I was going to say, but if like Warning had been their, let's say that was their last record, right?
Yeah.
They never do American Idiot. They never redefine themselves. I'm curious to know, and they probably still do, but do they end up in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? Obviously, Dookie was huge, right? Like, it was part of that whole like alternative radio, like second boom sort of thing. Because obviously you had like Nirvana and the whole grunge thing a few years prior.
Right.
And then Dookie comes out in 94, and it's part of like that whole, explosion again, right? Like, thanks to Nirvana. But I am curious, because they definitely redefined themselves and did something incredibly ambitious with American Idiot. And yeah, I'm curious to know if they would still sit in the same place. Like they're still, as old as they are, as long as they've been around, they're still playing giant shows.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and it's again to bring up the Offspring, because their album Smash came out. I mean, similar, maybe even a year before, or similar year,
Right.
and that's I think still to date the biggest selling independent release.
Yeah.
But with them, like they haven't really done that where they redefine themselves or whatever. They just kind of keep doing a similar thing, and I can't imagine the Offspring would be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Yeah, no, and that's an excellent point because I don't think they would either. But yeah, they were a huge at that time as well.
And I think they still are. Like I still see them playing arenas and stuff, and maybe it's just more nostalgia because they had.
Yeah, they're not. I mean, definitely not to the same level as let's say Green Day.
Yeah.
Considering the Offspring just played K-Days here this summer, which is like our summer like fair.
Did you
they
go?
Played no, I wanted to purely for that say like the the nostalgic reason. But I think I either had to work that night or I think I had to work that night. Must have. No, I didn't. It was like it was the very first night, and there was just for whatever reason, I didn't get a chance. We were leaving for Vancouver Island the next morning.
Right.
It maybe even that night actually. No, it was Saturday we left. So yeah, it was the Friday, but we were leaving the next day for Vancouver Island. I was like, it's probably not a good idea to go, so we didn't go. But
yeah,
I would have. The only time I've never seen, and we'll do an episode about the Offspring. I've never seen the Offspring live. But I did, I've seen live videos where I'm just like, I don't want to see the Offspring live.
Yeah, I mean, they're not a band necessarily that you'd go to be entertained. It's more just to sing all those terrible songs
Just
they had
to
on the radio.
feel old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To look at them and be like, oh, okay, I still feel pretty good about myself down here.
Yeah. we will talk about the Offspring. Maybe that'll be one of our upcoming episodes because we don't want to jump back and forth too much. But
right.
But yeah, Green Day, I've just always been amazed at their ability to reinvent themselves. And I mean, they could be in the process of doing that again. I know you're not a fan of Father of All, the single that came out. And I will say this, it doesn't sound like Green Day to me. It sounds like Green Day discovered garage rock.
Yeah.
But they've done that a couple times too, especially, and we talked a bit about not really enjoying the Uno Dos Tres albums. They've got some fine songs on there as well, but no, that they kind of delve into that a little bit there too, like the whole garage rock vibe. But
right, yeah,
it is.
Yeah, I was gonna say at this point, I mean, I'm okay if they just do their own thing. I don't feel like I need some amazing album from them. However, their last one. If we're allowed to skip to radio, Revolution Radio. So I was going to say Radio Surgery. That's Newfound Glory.
Yeah.
That album was awesome, and it still had the energy and the cool guitar parts, and so it's not like they've had 2 or 3 albums that have been bummers by any means. So I'm still intrigued to see what they do next. But
yeah, I'm definitely reserving my judgment on Father of All. But yeah, Revolution Radio, I remember that was the same thing. When they first released, was it Bang Bang or whatever? I was kind of like, oh, this isn't bad. I don't mind this.
Yeah.
And then there was a follow-up single where I was like, and then I just never paid any attention to it. And then I didn't actually listen to the album until prepping for this episode, and I had to pull myself away from it. Yeah. Because I was like, really dang, this is actually really enjoyable. And it's still actually, I know in the review, the description on Apple Music says Green Day gets back to basics or whatever, right? And I'm like, yeah, okay, but there's still elements of 21st Century Breakdown, of American Idiot, the rock opera thing. They have some longer songs on there that I was like, yeah, but it's still, it's a really enjoyable listen. That's why I was surprised. I was like, wait, someone already dropped this off at Value Village? What the heck, man?
Yeah. No, who knows? But yeah, it's interesting that with American Idiot and 21st Century, how they did have that more theatrical, and so I wonder if they had just had enough of that, or if they did just want to go back to the basics. And so it's always intriguing when bands, and this happens fairly often, where they kind of make a shift, and then all of a sudden it's we just want to get back to what it was, and so it's funny that in the time when they're making that shift, they have those thoughts and feelings of, okay, like we want to step away from what we've been doing. But when it comes down to it, that's what they're good at doing, right? And so it's always intriguing to hear bands that actually miss it. So not to say don't, take an album or two and experiment or whatever, but at the same time, it's like, if you're known for this kind of music, like that's what people are going to stick around for. So,
well, yeah, and we've talked about this with some different things, and just like the argument there is like, well, if you really want to listen to, old straight up punk rock Green Day, those albums still exist. There is also something to say, like, I would like to hear new songs because, I've heard those songs so many times, right? But I will say this about Father of All is I just saw a video because, they're on tour in Europe right now. I don't know if they're in Spain or wherever they were, but there was a video that was released and it was them playing Father of All and I think Basket Case, maybe.
Oh, yeah, it was on Good Morning America or not, maybe not America.
This was like an evening huge outdoor show with pyro and stuff, and they were playing, and I wish I knew where it was because there's just like some crazy like old architecture buildings in the back that just looked awesome.
Yeah.
But I will say Father of All sounded better, I thought, live than like that album, like the single release.
Actually, I don't know why I thought Good Morning America. I didn't think of something else because I think I just watched that too. As those two songs I just saw Link posted last week, and I do remember thinking that, okay, this Father of All, like he doesn't have the same annoying effects on his voice where he's kind of singing all high pitched and whatever, but yeah.
Like he still is, like he's still doing like his falsetto, but it's you can hear a little more Billy Joe in there, than on the studio version for sure. And I mean, that's kind of why I'm like, you know what, I'm going to reserve judgment on that record. I don't have a problem with it. It's different, and Green Day has changed directions before.
Yeah,
and in my mind, it took me a while, but I think it worked out. Right, where I'm like, I like those records. There are moments on 21st Century Breakdown and on American Idiot where songs maybe get a little long, but then all of a sudden they like change directions, and you're like, oh, what is this? Like, so.
I discovered 21st Century like way after it, and just remember thinking like, man, there's some awesome songs on here that I totally missed out on.
Yeah, it's crazy because it's 10 years old now.
Yeah, wow.
But yeah, no, those couple of records I think are great. I did want to kind of maybe just trying to see how long we've been going here to start bringing it home a little bit. I'm pretty sure you were like me and every other 90s kid who not necessarily got into punk rock, but got into alternative music. I'm sure one of the most iconic things that you picture when you think of Green Day has got to be Woodstock 94.
I was just going to say that. Getting mud thrown at his guitar. Playing When I Come Around. Yeah.
Yeah, well, because they used that for the music video, but then when you see like the extended, like he at some point, Billy Joe takes his guitar off, he's throwing mud back, he catches mud at one point and just immediately shoves it in his mouth. Ugh. Like it's just this whole thing that was going on that I'm like, that is insane. So like for me, I'm like, that's the like Woodstock 94 memory. And then of course, like they try to do Woodstock again 5 years later, and everyone thinks of like Limp Bizkit and Break Stuff when like riots start.
Right.
So it's like just a very different shift in what was happening, kind of in music or whatever. But no, Green Day, because I think Woodstock 94 would have been right after Dookie came out. Like, they hadn't reached, I don't think they'd reached the peak of where they would be off that record. In fact, that performance may be, in fact, what like fully launched them.
Yeah, and it's crazy to think, like what was the time of that album coming out to when they played Woodstock, and had they really exploded in that time yet? Because I mean, that was a huge slot to be at Woodstock. So that's I never really thought about that.
Yeah, I'm assuming Woodstock was probably in late summer. Let's see if this tells me when Dookie came out. If I click on it, if it gives me a release date. February 1st, 94 is when Dookie came out.
Okay, so by the summer playing Woodstock, maybe.
So they had played, they played, it was a couple months.
Isn't that crazy to think? They were essentially nobody, and then they put this album out, and a year later they're playing this ridiculously huge music festival. And like,
and not even a year later. And I don't even think they were like playing a prime spot in the day, right? Like, I mean, it was a huge music festival, but
Yeah, that's true.
but there were definitely some spots where it was like, I don't think they were playing a prime spot. I mean, I think of like Woodstock 99, for instance, and like some of the earlier bands. Do you remember like Serial Joe?
Oh yeah.
They played
They were
Woodstock
Canadian, weren't
99.
they? Wow.
Yeah, and like they had no business playing Woodstock 99, but they did. So I mean, like, I don't know where Green Day sat on that day, but yeah, no, it was they were on the verge of becoming huge, right?
Yeah.
Like, and good for them.
Yeah.
Good for them. But yeah, no, Green Day will always be a band, I think, for me that always like I will always appreciate them.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
While not in the same way as, like some of the bands we've talked about, where like MXPX, for instance, I credit them and say they're the reason I really got into music.
Right.
I'd heard Green Day before actually getting into MXPX, but then like I never really went out of my way to buy stuff until later, right? Until I was like realizing, like, man, these guys, the scope of what they did was huge.
Definitely. Yeah.
And without Green Day, you don't have the explosion of, like Blink 182 and stuff like that in the 99, 2000 and the early 2000s, right? Like,
yeah, very true.
It's so weird to me to think like, because I think they call like the like early 2000s pop punk is like the second wave of pop punk explosion.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, Green Day was literally only a couple years before that. In fact, they were like doing stuff at the same time, right? Like when you go back with Blink 182 and like their earlier albums, right? But it's just kind of funny that, that's when they hit. But yeah, no, Green Day, I think I don't think it's possible to overstate the importance of Green Day.
Yeah, I agree.
In what we listen to, right?
Yeah.
Even though they, like the song 86 on Insomniac is talking about how like they were one of those bands where, as much as I probably fell victim a little bit to this, or not victim, but fell in line, group mentality sort of thing with like, remember how there was a time, and maybe this still exists, but for sure when I was young and like actively involved in a punk scene, there was this whole thing where it was like, punks versus sellouts, right? Like, those guys are sellouts. And like Green Day were the face of that.
Oh yeah.
Right? Like they got hit so hard by their own scene.
Yeah.
And, like to the point where it was like, as soon as they signed to Reprise Records, they weren't allowed to come back to their venue that they'd grown up in, right?
Yeah.
I think eventually down the road, I think they did do a show and a thing for Gilman.
Yeah.
But just in that time, and to see the interviews with Billy Joe and Mike and Trey and stuff at that time, it's a little bit heartbreaking because they literally talk about going like, if we were to do it all again, I don't know if I'd sign that contract. I don't know if they feel that way now.
Yeah.
But like at that time, yeah, they're like,
Right.
I don't know if we'd sign that contract, and to think like, what would have happened if they didn't? Like, who would they have been? Right? Like, I mean, they clearly had the chops and the songwriting ability to write monster hits, but if you don't have the distribution and the representation of a major label behind you, like say they stayed on Lookout Records, do they bankrupt Lookout Records because everyone catches wind of Green Day when they release Dookie on Lookout instead of Reprise, and then Lookout can't handle it? Does that happen? I don't know, but instead they got shunned by their own scene, and eventually again I think bridges were mended. But I did want to, I think, close with this, unless you've you share some of your last thoughts before we close, because I do have one last thing I want to point out.
Yeah, just there'll always be a band that that sticks out. Like I said, I can still remember when I first heard them, and I think that's always such a crucial part to being attached to a band or certain kind of music. If you can remember that first memory and just how it made you feel, had I just heard it, in some other way instead of discovering that tape, they might have not had the same effect on me or whatever. And so, yeah, definitely a band that I can appreciate, and for the most part put any of their albums on and enjoy it, and yeah, I'll still be listening to them for years to come.
Yeah, it is interesting to think, like, we grew up in like the last, I want to say, like, great era of music, right? Like now you have these streaming services and you're constantly discovering new music, but like, I want to say Green Day would have been a part of the last like generation of like artists, bands you had to discover like through word of mouth radio, like that just had that feeling, right? Like where they could actually, I don't know if we'll ever see a band do that again, where they just come and like take over, right? Like, and I mean, you can make an argument.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say you can make an argument with like the second wave of pop punk and like how they got back on radio and TV and stuff, but it was nowhere near the same level of like breaking down walls, right? Like, and I mean, obviously that goes back to Nirvana and stuff that was changing, but I sometimes think about it like, will we ever see that again? Like the announcement of, you know, Rage Against the Machine getting back together, that was made, I think, the same day as like My Chemical Romance announcement. And for me, I'm like, oh, hooray, My Chemical Romance is back. Like, I know there are people who really like My Chemical Romance, but they didn't do anything near as like monstrous, for me anyways, in like the world of music, as like Rage Against the Machine. Rage Against the Machine similarly came up, you know, at a time where it was like there was this movement that was happening, right? Like this explosion, and that they were a part of. Whereas like, yeah, My Chemical Romance came around in the early 2000s, and they, credit to them, you know, they wrote some fantastic songs and were creative in their own right. They weren't just another, you know, mall punk knockoff. They did their thing. Yeah. In fact, you might be able to say they changed mall punk for their job, like their era or whatever, right? But it all became about black eyeliner and stuff. But which Billy Joe rocks the black eyeliner too. So you know what?
Yeah.
But before going too far down a tangent, I did want to wrap up with one thing, and it kind of ties in with Billy Joe and his eyeliner. Green Day is a weird band in the sense that Billy Joe never seems to age.
Yeah, I noticed that too.
Mike Dirnt has always looked like a 45 to 50-year-old man. And Trey Cool these days just looks like he's trying so hard to hang on to. Like sometimes I'm like, it looks like he's either he wears a lot of makeup or he's had a lot of plastic surgery.
Yeah,
or something.
Yeah, I feel like it's one of those where it's just going to hit them one day, and they're just going to have to accept it, or I guess just keep getting plastic surgery or whatever. But yeah, that must be weird for them too, because you know, for these bands that have such iconic looks. Yeah, you know, whether it's like still having long hair or whatever, like it's gonna have to change sometime. So what do you do with that? You know, you see guys and it's like, oh man, like he's looking rough. He should probably just get a haircut, and you know.
Yeah. Speaking of looks, did Green Day ever influence you in any way where you were like, ooh, you know, whether it's like styles or hairstyles or anything like that?
I'm sure they did in little ways. I don't think I ever. Yeah, I wouldn't have been nearly as much as, you know, bands like MXPX or Blink-182. I don't know if Green Day ever really set out to do that. So yeah, I can't say they really influenced that part.
Green Day influenced me in the fact that Billy Joe Armstrong has always made me want to own striped shirts.
Oh yeah,
I feel like that guy has or had an infinite collection of striped shirts.
Yeah.
And anytime I see one, I'm like, that reminds me of Billy Joe Armstrong.
Or a black dress shirt and a skinny red tie or something. Or
if you're going the American Idiot route. Although he was wearing a tie in that show I watched.
Yeah.
In Australia, he was wearing a tie.
Yeah,
but he was like wearing. Yeah, he was wearing a brown shirt. Did he have a black tie and black pants? Anyway, whatever. We don't need to go down that route. Yeah. Look it up. It's like Green Day live at Goat Island or something like that. It was actually a pretty good show. It's fun to go back, and that's what I love about some of these bands, and Green Day is a prime example because there's just so much stuff on the internet to watch of Green Day, right? But to go back and see these like snapshots where it's like, man, I remember life being like that, you know, and like just looking and saying like, yep, that reminds me of exactly where I would have been at that time, sort of deal. So it's kind of fun. But
yeah. So what about favorite songs?
Oh shoot, yeah, man. How did we? Wow, I was about to blow right past that. Favorite songs. I was thinking about this. I was trying to come up with something. And you know, I think I'm going to have to say, like going back to Insomniac. I always like to say that Insomniac was my favorite Green Day album. I don't know if I necessarily believe that. It felt like the one at the time where I was like, oh yeah, people would like crap all over Green Day. And I'd be like, yeah, but Insomniac, man. That's like the underground after they blew up album, right? Yeah. But I've always liked like the combination of Brain Stew into Jaded.
Yeah, I love
and how they like did those videos together. And Brain Stew actually features probably my favorite lyric of all Green Day songs, when it's in the bridge, I think, and the guitar is just like going off like the dan right?
Yeah.
And Godzilla is roaring in the background.
Oh, I don't know if I ever picked up on that.
No, you didn't, because have you ever? It's the Godzilla remix.
Oh, okay.
Do you remember like I think it was like Godzilla 2000 or whatever?
Oh, like a
that
movie
came
or
out.
something?
Yeah, it was a
Okay.
movie, and I had the soundtrack, and it featured Brain Stew, and in the parts where it's just like huge, I want to say they added strings. I'm not sure if there's strings on the album version. Maybe there is, but then also there's like Godzilla roaring in the background. It's so
Nice.
awesome. You got to look it up.
Yeah.
That album also featured some Rage Against the Machine. It was a pretty decent soundtrack. But yeah, I've always liked how those two go together.
Yeah.
And then as far so Insomniac's been fun, but a song that I recently discovered that I think I really love, I want to say off of, what's it called? Revolution Radio. I think it is Youngblood. Yeah, Youngblood.
Yeah, that's probably my favorite one off that album.
The
too.
chorus gets a little annoying. The Young Blood, like it's a little
it's just kind of over and
repetitive,
over.
but
But the
But I
verses
like
are awesome in that song.
so good, and
Yeah.
there's some attitude in that song. It's pretty awesome. But what about
Yeah.
you? Favorite album, favorite song?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to go with Insomniac as well as I listen.
Not allowed. Nope, I crossed it off the list. You can't do
Okay,
it. You got to
wow.
pick something.
Just like I felt like it had a bit more. I don't know if it was just energy or more upbeat
Yeah.
songs than Dookie had. But yeah, I think for songs, the opening track on Dookie, "Burning Out," I think it's called.
Right.
Yep. Just where it comes in with that little snare fill and.
Yeah.
Just I can
declare I don't care. No
yeah,
more.
I feel like I
Yeah.
can still hear that for the first time, and
Yeah.
it just be like what is this? And it was so good.
Yeah.
And then Basket Case obviously is a pretty iconic song on there, and the video for it was awesome, and so that's kind of always in my head. And then
Yeah.
one off of a later album, like I said, I discovered 21st Century Breakdown later on.
Yeah.
And it's one of the last songs on the album called "See the Light," and it's just so stinking catchy.
Yeah.
And I can just listen to that song over and over. And I remember when I first heard it, just feeling like how did I miss this? And it's those would be my top ones.
The funny little anecdote that I saw in that that like VH1 behind the music or whatever today about Green Day. I want to say it was the guy from Lookout Records who also kind of ran Gilman Street. He was talking about Insomniac and how Green Day had basically released it being like, look, we're still edgy and angry or whatever, right? And so they released this like dark kind of angry album, especially after Dookie, right? Like Dookie, the cover's all cartoony and all this stuff, right? And it's just this like fun album, and then Insomniac comes and it's like the cover's a little more like weird and you know what I mean? And then like the gremlin on the CD, but he's like the ironic thing is they were never really like edgy and dark and angry.
Right.
Like it was like their kind of way of saying like, look, you shunned us, but look, we're still punk rock. But he's like, but they were always like writing love songs and like poppy music and whatever. So it's just kind of funny. But yeah, Insomniac I think is a great listen. And one thing I will always love about Green Day is you know a Green Day song, especially that older stuff, even when you go back to like Kerplunk and 39 Smooth and stuff like that. It's a Green Day song. Like you can hear Billy Joe's writing style in those songs. Now obviously they expand on that as time goes on, but I'll always appreciate that. But yeah, no, I think we've been going for a while. I think I said I was going to try and wrap it up about halfway through this episode. Now we kept going.
But too much to talk about when you got 10 albums.
Too much,
or
man. I mean, it's
whatever.
Green Day. It's literally one of the biggest bands the genre, if not the biggest band the genre has ever produced, right? Like we could easily do more episodes, I think, on Green Day, and maybe we will in the future. Who knows? But before we get out of here, we're going to do all that housekeeping stuff all over again. You can find the show wherever you find podcasts, literally, basically everywhere. And I love that people listen to it in all different places.
Yeah.
But wherever you're listening, make sure you subscribe, you rate, you review, that kind of stuff, because especially on like Apple Podcasts, rating and reviewing it, that's going to help it get recommended for other people. So then, more people can hear the show, more people can start talking with us about their favorite punk bands and stuff like that. And you can send recommendations. If you want to send recommendations, head on over to our social media. You can find us on Twitter at Growing Punk Pod. We are also on Instagram at Growing Up Punk. I myself am on Twitter and Instagram at David Growing Up. Oh, we're also on Facebook. We're literally everywhere. Aaron, you're on Instagram at Aaron Grew Up Punk, right?
Yeah, and I've had some people add me, and I even let them be my friends. So.
Oh, that's so nice of you. So nice. Aaron is finally
awesome.
opening that circle.
Yeah, some send messages, and I've had some really cool conversations with people. So keep it coming.
There you go, man. So we're gonna wrap it up there. Let us know what you think. You're a Green Day fan? What's your Green Day story? I feel like everyone's got a Green Day story. You can share that with us wherever you follow us. And that's going to do it. So bye-bye.